Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 121 of Contemplating Life. This is part 2 of a story of Thanksgiving week 2025, when I tried to give my sister Carol time off to visit family in Texas. Things did not go well. As we left off in the previous episode, Thanksgiving evening, I was settled in bed on my ventilator around 10 p.m. at the Greenwood Healthcare Center. I requested that the respiratory therapist get me off the ventilator at about 6 a.m. At the time, I was unaware this was a shift change, but it turns out that was irrelevant. As a result of the tension and anxiety I was feeling over the day's events, I was only able to get about 2 hours sleep. When the RT checked on me around 3 a.m., I requested to be removed from the ventilator because I knew I wasn't going to get any more sleep. It wasn't just the stress of the day's events. I was seriously worried about my aide, Kiera. I've explained the bond that we share. And given her baby daddy's violent nature, anything could have happened to her. Also, I knew she occasionally struggled with her mental health. Worrying about her for the next few days was the worst part of the entire experience. It also didn't help that another resident across the hall had his TV on at high volume for most of the night. There was a minor problem getting me off the ventilator. Now, while on the ventilator, I can't talk, and I'd prearranged my usual method of signaling. Because I can't nod my head, when I want to indicate yes, I wiggle my eyebrows up and down vertically. To indicate no, I twitch my mouth side to side. I've discovered that even someone who doesn't know in advance that this is my method of communication can easily deduce my intent. Other systems, such as blinking once for yes or twice for no, require you to know the system in advance. Anyway, while on the ventilator, there's a balloon cuff in my trach. When it's inflated, it prevents the air pressure from the vent coming back out my nose and mouth. Now, the procedure for removing me from the ventilator is to disconnect the hose, deflate the balloon completely with a syringe, and then insert a speaking valve cap on the trach so that I can speak. My RT for the evening was a nice woman named Elizabeth. At about 3 a.m., when I signaled to her that I wanted to get off the vent, she removed the vent hose, inserted the cap, and then deflated the balloon. I signaled no and had a look of extreme discomfort on my face because I was unable to breathe. She instantly said, "I'm getting the balloon." And in just a couple of seconds, the situation was remedied. I explained to her she should fully deflate the balloon before inserting the cap, because I'm unable to breathe with the balloon inflated and the cap inserted. I explained to her I was especially sensitive to this situation, because a year ago in May, I was in Methodist Hospital, and an incompetent nurse inserted my cap without deflating the balloon. I was completely unable to breathe for about 30 seconds. That incompetent nurse was unaware she'd done anything wrong. At least Elizabeth knew what she was doing. She just did things in the wrong order. While I was never in any danger from her, it was quite disturbing. The mistakes she made, however brief, is something that a properly trained RT would never do. So with little sleep, I decided to cancel my other aide, Shatoya, from getting me up, and I would stay in bed all day. I'm able to take brief naps without needing the ventilator, and I did so throughout the day. One of the other tasks that the RTs perform is to suction my trach with a catheter. The procedure is you remove the speaking valve, insert the catheter deeply into the trach, and then place your finger over a hole in the side of the catheter, and that initiates suction. On 2 different occasions, my RTs put the finger over the opening before putting it in, so it was sucking on the way in and out. This is against the proper procedure. I explained to him if he's have the suction on while you're going in. It causes your airway to collapse, making it difficult to insert the catheter. It also makes it harder to breathe during the process. Once I explained this, they did quite well using the proper method. Again, this is something a properly trained respiratory therapist should know. Anyway, after getting off the ventilator at 3 a.m. Friday morning, the staff continued to check on me until around 6 a.m., when the shift changed. Then I didn't see anyone for the next 3 hours. As the day staff eventually came by, I asked them if they'd been briefed on my inability to use the call button. None of them knew anything about me. They had no idea about the call button situation. They didn't know I was there temporarily for respite care. They were completely clueless about any aspect of my care. All that would have been necessary would have been for the Thursday night staff, the RN, the RT, and the CNA, to say to their Friday morning counterparts, "We have a new patient, Mr. Young. He's in 230. He's here for a few days of respite care. He's unable to use the nurse call button, so please check in with him periodically. Perhaps drop by as soon as you can to introduce yourself." I don't think it was unreasonable for me to expect that kind of continuity care and reasonable communication between shifts. I was very disappointed it did not occur. If the staff is busy with other patients, I don't mind waiting, as long as I don't have an emergency. But when I'm ignored due to poor communication, it's troubling. I was very pleased with the day staff on Friday, and they were apologetic for not being briefed on my situation. I asked if there was a supervisor I could speak to about my concerns. They said I needed to talk to Amanda, who was the unit chief. I asked if she could drop by at her convenience. When she dropped by, I explained my concerns about the lack of communication between shifts and about the improper procedures for removing me from the ventilator. She was quite considerate and attentive to my concerns. On Friday night, I spoke with some of the staff and reminded them to please brief the night shift on my situation. They replied, "We will. Amanda told us all about it." So I was very pleased how it was addressed. Friday evening, I asked the RT what time the shift change was. She said 6 a.m. I specifically requested that she get me off the ventilator before the shift change. I slept well Friday night, and when I woke up, the Saturday day shift RT was there. She took me off the ventilator, but could not find the cap for my trach. This is precisely why I wanted to be off the vent before shift change. Admittedly, I didn't say why it was important to me to be off the vent before shift change. I didn't think I needed to explain my every request. The Saturday morning RT eventually found the speaking valve and put it on the trach. I asked if she had been briefed about my care. She had not. Neither had my CNA. I asked whether Amanda was on duty again, and if not, who was in charge. She said, "You're lucky. Your nurse Becky is the supervisor today." When Becky arrived to do my morning G-tube feeding and my morning medications, I began to address my concerns to her. I believe she has a rather severe case of ADHD or something. She would constantly interrupt me with questions unrelated to what we were discussing. On multiple occasions, I had to start the sentence over again to try to keep the conversation on track. Her questions were not ones that needed immediate answers. She was inquiring about my home life, which I'd be happy to discuss with her at length, but not while I'm trying to explain to her how her staff was failing me. It left me with the impression she was totally unconcerned with my issues. As we moved on to my morning feeding and medications, she said she was getting them from the pharmacy. I told her I brought my medication from home, She didn't need to get it from the pharmacy. She insisted the doctor had ordered the medications from the pharmacy. I was confident she hadn't received any orders from my doctor. I didn't know whether they had a physician on staff or not. I attempted to say, "Don't crush my pills to put them in the G-tube until I can look at your packaging and know I'm getting the right stuff." But when I said, "Don't crush my pills," she quickly interrupted me and said, "I have to crush them or they won't go in your G-tube." I paused for a second and said, "Let me finish my sentence. Don't crush my pills to put them in the G-tube until I can look at your packaging and know that I'm getting the right stuff." She then excused herself to do something else and said she would be right back. When she returned, she said, "Those pills from the pharmacy were not for you. We'll use the pills you brought from home." I was appalled. It gave me cause to wonder if I had not insisted on verifying the proper medication. She might have given me someone else's pills. She then prepared my formula for my G-tube feeding. She never asked how much formula I should get. And before I knew what she was doing, she had poured a quantity of formula into a container and diluted it with water. When I complained, she says, "But you're supposed to get water with it." I replied, "Yeah, the pills get mixed with water, and we use plain water at the end to flush everything out." I measured my formula using 4 syringes of 60 milliliters each. Now that she had diluted it, there was no way to know exactly how much I was getting. When I explained this, she said, "Don't you get a full carton?" "No, actually, 240 milliliters comes out to 1 full carton, but about a fourth of another carton." Although I had given them a list of my medications and formula requirements to put in my file, she apparently had not read it, nor did she ask me what I was supposed to get. We emptied the remaining contents of the first carton into the diluted mixture, and then gave me a portion from another carton. I'm not certain if that first carton was full, but it was close enough. When we were all finished, she said, "I guess I'd better start listening to you, shouldn't I?" I'm uncertain how successful I was at suppressing my sarcasm when I simply said yes. About noon on Saturday, Nurse Becky returned to give me my lunch. I explained to her I didn't get my next feeding or medications until around 4 p.m. I told her I had informed the staff when I came in that the first feeding and meds should be at any convenient time in the morning, then sometime around 4, plus or minus a reasonable amount, and then my final feeding and meds around 9, plus or minus some amount. On the first day, the staff said that would be no problem, and they followed my instructions. On the second day, she insisted my chart said I should get my second round around noon. "Well, then your chart's wrong." She reluctantly agreed to wait until 4 p.m. During my later feedings, we had a chance to chat and to get to know each other. And despite my difficulties with her, she was a very friendly and personable individual. I began to tell her the story of why I was there. I explained that I had 2 home health aides lined up to take care of me, but on Wednesday morning they got into a ridiculous argument. I was concerned it might turn violent, and I had no choice but to fire the aggressor. Now, we were alone in my room. There was no way anyone could have heard our conversation. However, she leaned forward and whispered to me, "Were they black?" I could not have been more shocked or offended. I explained that the women involved grew up under difficult circumstances, in a culture where you constantly have to defend yourself. I admitted, yes, they're black, but race has nothing to do with it. Did she really think that if she whispered a racist comment, it was less racist? And what made her think I would not find such a comment offensive? I think my most difficult encounter with her was that throughout she was extremely friendly, outgoing, personable. Initially, it was difficult not to like her. I got over that pretty quickly. In my email to Ms. Webb, I said, "Far be it from me to question your hiring practices. However, I would think that someone in a supervisory position would need strong communication skills, especially listening skills. Had she not been the supervisor, I would have complained to her supervisor." Now, I didn't want to create a confrontation. Someone later suggested I should ask to see the director of nursing. But I already decided to write you this email, and that was enough. The previous day, when I spoke to the other supervisor, Amanda, I took the opportunity to ask her about a bath. She said we do baths on the second shift on Monday and Thursday. I explained I wasn't talking about getting into the shower in a shower chair. I just wanted a bed bath. She paused a second and then said, "Yeah, we can do that." Her tone implied this was not the usual procedure. Maybe I misread her tone. I was too exhausted that day to do anything. I expected my aide, Shatoya, to be there on Saturday, and I told my Saturday morning CNA that she was coming. Then Saturday morning, Shatoya canceled. Something came up, and she was also quite concerned about the impending snowstorm. Now, one could argue I refused to have them bathe me, preferring to have my person do it. But during the entire stay, no one offered to even wipe my face. When I got on the bedpan, they cleaned me, but no other hygiene was offered to me during my entire stay. I admit I didn't push the issue, mostly because I wanted to see if they would raise it, and they never did. The facility is very noisy. As I mentioned, more than one of my neighbors kept their TV on at all hours of the day and night at a loud volume. One of them liked to bang on the table loudly to get the nurse's attention. I think it was Saturday afternoon when I overheard something disturbing. First, let me say I get about 15 to 20 spam phone calls per day trying to get me to sign up for a new Medicare plan. They make it sound like they're calling for an official Medicare office, and they're trying to ensure that you can get the best benefits you can get. When one of my neighbors received such a phone call, he had it on speakerphone, so I could hear the caller quite clearly. I couldn't consistently hear what the resident was saying. A couple of years ago, when I switched my Medicare plan, I ended up talking to someone who was a broker. They collect your information, and then they transfer you to a salesperson who actually signs you up. The guy was talking to one such broker, but he didn't realize who he was talking to. He gave him lots of personal information, including his social security number, phone number, address, and date of birth. It was everything a scammer could have used to steal his identity. Fortunately, this seemed to be a legitimate broker, and when he transferred the call to the salesperson, the resident realized they were trying to sell him new insurance, and he hung up. It's no wonder I get so many phone calls. I'm certain that a significant percentage of people fall for it and get signed up for a different insurance plan, earning that broker a nice commission. When I was taken off the ventilator Saturday morning, the RT turned off the power on both the ventilator and the humidifier. Typically, I don't turn off the humidifier because it's difficult to find the power button, so I just unplug it. But it was no big deal. If she found the button and turned it off, that'd be okay. My Saturday night RT was Elizabeth, who had been my RT 2 nights earlier. When she put me on the vent, I warned her that the humidifier had been manually turned off, and she'd have to turn it back on. She, too, struggled to find the power button, and I could hear her pressing many different buttons. Eventually, she found the right one. She put me on the vent, and all was well for a time. About 20 minutes later, an alarm began blaring from the humidifier. It's a distinctly different sound from the ventilator alarm. Although the humidifier failing was nothing critical, it would be impossible to sleep with that alarm going off. Throughout my stay, I noticed I could hear other people's ventilator alarms, and it seemed to me that those alarms rang for an unusually long period of time before they were addressed. Now, I didn't have access to a clock, but it's my estimate that that humidifier alarm continued sounding for at least 45 minutes, perhaps an hour, before anyone came to investigate. Elizabeth showed up and began fiddling with controls to try to correct the problem. At first, she'd mistaken it for the ventilator alarm instead of a humidifier alarm. Now, the ventilators I heard throughout the facility had the same distinct alarm as mine, and I thought she would have realized this was not a vent alarm. I kept trying to get her attention, hoping she would take me off the vent, and I tried to assist her in diagnosing the problem. Or failing that, instruct her to simply leave the humidifier turned off. She kept insisting she had to fix this and could not address my concerns. At one point she said, "I'll call your CNA after I fix this, and she can get whatever you need." That would have been fruitless. While I'm on the ventilator, I can't talk. And I didn't want my CNA. I wanted her. I'd previously made it clear to all the RTs and CNAs, if you can't figure out what I want, get the RT to take me off the vent so I can talk. Eventually she relented and asked, "Do you want off the vent?" And I signaled yes with my eyebrows, and she took me off the ventilator. Throughout this process, I lost all confidence in her and to some extent the entire staff. The humidifier was not a critical issue, but they didn't seem to know it was a non-critical alarm. I asked myself, what if this had been something critical? I didn't want to risk waiting an hour for someone to come and see what was wrong. I instructed her to shut everything off, and I would continue the rest of the evening without the ventilator. I can sleep without it. It's difficult, but not impossible. And I knew I would not have any peace of mind being on the vent, given the lack of attention that had been paid to that alarm. I tried not to second-guess the staff who prioritized other patients over me, but I would think a ventilator alarm would move me up the list to be addressed expediently. Somehow, I was able to get a reasonably good night's sleep Saturday night without the ventilator. Carol made it through the snowstorm Saturday night and returned from Texas. Shatoya came Sunday morning to get me bathed and dressed and into my wheelchair. But there was a problem. There was no hot water available. Maintenance was working on it, so I wasn't going to get a bath. Shatoya got me dressed, and with the help of one of the staff CNAs, they got me into the wheelchair using their lift seat. I was unfamiliar how it felt to hang in that seat, and I thought they had me sitting in the chair okay. I told the CNA she could unhook the sling, but when Shatoya tried to pull my hips back to get me sitting up straight, I realized I was on the edge of my seat. Shatoya had to grab me by the pants belt to keep me from falling out of the chair, while the CNA reconnected her part of the sling. Once I was securely in the chair, we had no difficulty removing the sling from under me, even though I was partially sitting on it. This confirmed my suspicion that we could have gotten the sling under me the first night. When Shatoya put my remote onto the bracket on the wheelchair, that's when I discovered it wasn't working, because we had plugged in the wrong charger. My phone was working, and much to my surprise, I had a text message from Kiara. She was texting me from her aunt's phone. She had checked herself into the mental unit of a hospital, but was doing okay. They wouldn't give her her own phone back. I immediately broke down and began sobbing uncontrollably. All the turmoil I'd been through, the worst part was worrying about her. Shatoya was there to dry my eyes and give me a hug. And once I got settled down, she helped me pack up some of my stuff. Then I told her she could go. Carol had arrived home very late Saturday night and had been dreaming all day. She also had to go to the grocery store to pick up things because there was no food in the house. So then she had to go to Kathy's to pick up the keys for the van. I hung out around the nurse's station in a nearby lounge area, where I ran into a resident named Mark. He is a quadriplegic and said he had been there about a month. He was awaiting the completion of the construction of a new home that would be totally accessible. I gave him one of my cards with my podcast info and contact information, but I never did hear from him. Carol arrived about 5 p.m. We loaded up everything, and when I got home, I went straight to bed. On Monday, Kara's mom checked her out of the hospital, and we reconnected on Facebook Messenger. And she asked, "Do I still have a job?" I told her she could start any time when she was ready. Shatoya got me up on Monday morning. Kara returned to work on Tuesday, and we had a tearful reunion. I began writing a long email to the admissions director, Amy Webb. I wrote all day Monday and sent it on Tuesday. I concluded with the following paragraphs. Quote, "I've reflected on my experiences quite a bit since I got home. I don't like complaining, but I felt compelled to give you this admittedly overly detailed account of my experiences. I thought about your residents who are incapable of expressing their concerns or complaints. I thought about people like Mark, who might be reluctant to complain because they're going to have to be in your facility for a considerable time. I was in a unique position where I could report this and not fear any backlash. So, not only for my own concerns should I ever need your facility again, but for those who cannot or would not complain, I felt compelled to share this feedback with you. I'm not coming at this from the idea of, I insist you fire these people or severely discipline them or whatever. That's for your HR department to decide what to do with this information. I'm not going to sue. I'm not going to tell you how to run your business. I won't pretend to know that I appreciate the challenges you face in managing such a facility. I'm satisfied now that I've said my piece, and should I need your facility again, I will need strong assurances that such issues can be avoided." Turns out I did need their facility again in March of 2026. Stay tuned for future episodes about that tale. Kara found a safe place to live temporarily, and the people at the hospital helped her file a restraining order. Recently, she rented a new apartment, and she'll be working at a nursing facility for a shift that doesn't interfere with her work with me. I found out that T delivered her baby by C-section on Friday, so even if there hadn't been the big blow-up on Wednesday, Kira would have had to take over on Friday anyway, and whether or not the baby daddy would have ruined things is anybody's guess. Carol had a wonderful time on vacation. I kept trying to convince myself that everything I went through was worth it, so she could have a good time. And in some respects, it was. However, the long-term emotional scars I endured would take a long time to heal. And to a certain extent, they still haven't, and may never. In our next installment, I'll discuss those issues and what happened next. One more thought before we wrap this up. I've talked about the emotional impact this all had on me. However, I can't begin to know everything that Kira went through. The fact that she's come out from the other side of this terrible weekend and has put her life back together is a testament to what an amazing young lady she is. I'm blessed to have her in my life, as well as my sister Kara, my other aide Shatoya, Nurse Tony, and my cousin Kathy. So my deepest thanks to all my supporters, including them. So as always, if you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. I'm not in this for the money, but every bit helps. Even if you can't provide direct support, share links to this podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. All the back episodes are available, so check those out. If you have any comments, questions, or other feedback, do so on any of the platforms where you found the podcast. I'll see you next time as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.